Even let me pour my second cup of coffee. Brandon Walsh stood in my office doorway like he owned the place, arms crossed, chin up with that smug look kids get when they think they've outsmarted their old man. His suit was navy, expensive, and way too tight across the shoulders. The kind of fit that screams insecurity wrapped in daddy's money. "Daniel," he said, not bothering with good morning or anything decent. "We're letting you go. Effective immediately. My name is Daniel Murphy. I'm 51 years old. I live in Columbus, Ohio, in a house I bought when my son Jake was 10 and my marriage was still worth saving. Until this exact moment, I was the founder and CEO of Apex Industrial Security, a cybersecurity firm that protects manufacturing plants and defense contractors from hackers who'd love nothing more than to shut down American production lines." I set my mug down real slow. The coffee was still steaming, black as motor oil, just the way I like it after 20 years in the Marines. Taught me to appreciate simple things done right. "Excuse me?" He shifted his weight, but kept that practiced confidence. "The board decided to move in a new direction. We need leadership that aligns with our evolving vision." Evolving vision. I almost laughed. This from a 28-year-old Stanford MBA who couldn't tell the difference between a PLC and a PDF when he walked through our doors 8 months ago. The kid had spent his first week asking our senior engineers what industrial control systems meant. Now he was standing in my office talking about vision. "And who authorized this decision?" I asked, leaning back in my chair. Calm. Measured. The way you talk when you already know the answer but want to hear them say it out loud. "I did," he said. "I'm the acting CEO now. That gives me full discretion over personnel decisions." Acting CEO. Brandon Walsh, fresh out of business school, where they hand out degrees like participation trophies. Before joining us, he worked at some venture capital firm in California, which is a fancy way of saying he moved other people's money around and called it strategy. He got hired because his father, Thomas Walsh, owned a 12% stake in my company and had been whispering in board members' ears for the better part of a year. Old-fashioned nepotism, dressed up as strategic planning. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd built this company from nothing, starting in a rented garage in 2009 with my business partner Gary Holmes and a used server that sounded like a diesel engine. We'd spent our first 2 years working 80-hour weeks, living on coffee and determination, building security protocols that could protect industrial facilities from cyber attacks that most people didn't even know existed yet. Now this kid, who'd never spent a day working with his hands, never seen what happens when a factory goes dark because some hacker in Eastern Europe decides to have fun with the power grid, was telling me I didn't align with the company's vision. "You don't have the authority to remove a founding officer," I said. "That requires a formal board resolution." "In writing." He smiled. "Not warm. Cold as a February morning in Cleveland. The board's already aligned. This isn't up for debate." I stood up. All 6 feet 2 inches of me, shoulders square, the way they taught us at Paris Island 30 years ago. He straightened like he thought I might take a swing at him. I didn't. I'm not 25 anymore, and I learned a long time ago that the best fights are won with your brain, not your fists. Instead, I picked up my phone and slid it into my jacket pocket. Grabbed my keys from the desk. The silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable. Through the glass walls of my office, I could see the main floor where 180 good people were pretending to work while watching this drama unfold. Engineers, analysts, project managers. Most of them had been with us for years. Some had followed me here from other companies. All of them trusted that I'd never let them down. "Understood," I said. His eyebrows went up just a fraction. He wasn't expecting that. Kid thought he'd get drama, maybe some begging, definitely some pushing back. Instead, I walked past him without another word, down the hallway, past the conference rooms, and the break area where someone had put up a banner for our upcoming contract renewal with Midwest Manufacturing. The elevator ride down felt longer than usual. Funny how time stretches when your world shifts underneath you. Not that I was panicking. 20 years in the Marines teaches you to stay calm when things go sideways, and I had a feeling this was about to get very sideways indeed. I walked through the lobby without stopping. Linda at the front desk looked up with concern in her eyes, but I just nodded and kept walking. No point making a scene. Not yet, anyway. My truck was in the same spot it had been for 14 years, reserved parking with my name painted on the concrete barrier. I got in, closed the door, and sat there for a minute with the engine off, hands on the steering wheel. The parking garage was quiet, except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of traffic from the street above. That's when I reached into my briefcase and pulled out my laptop. I connected to my phone's hotspot and waited for everything to load. Took about 10 seconds. First thing I pulled up was the company charter, the original one I wrote myself in a Denny's back in 2009 with Gary Holmes. We were both broke then, living on unemployment checks and veteran benefits, trying to figure out how two ex-Marines could turn our experience with military cybersecurity into something that could pay the bills. Back then, most manufacturing plants had about as much cyber protection as a screen door. The big companies were starting to worry about hackers, but the smaller operations, the ones that actually made things, they figured if they weren't connected to the internet, they were safe. They were wrong. Dead wrong. And Gary, and I knew it. I scrolled down to Section 6, Subsection C. There it was, highlighted in yellow, because I'd flagged it 18 months ago, when Gary told me he wanted to retire and move to Florida with his wife Susan. No founding officer may be removed from their position without a 2/3 majority vote of the board, documented in writing and delivered with 30 days advance notice. Brandon hadn't given me 30 days. Hell, he hadn't given me 30 minutes. I took a screenshot, opened a new email, and typed in the addresses of all 7 board members. Subject line, immediate review required. Charter violation. Body, 1 sentence. Refer to Section 6C. I'll be in the office tomorrow at 9 a.m. sharp to discuss next steps. Hit send. Then I opened the file I kept updated every quarter, like clockwork. Equity distribution. Every stock transfer, every option exercised, every share bought and sold. Gary had owned 40% when we started. By the time he left, he was down to 25% after we brought in outside investors and issued employee stock options. He sold me his shares for $3.2 million, fair market value, because he trusted me to keep the company true to what we'd built. After Gary left, I kept acquiring pieces whenever the opportunity came up. Board members who wanted to diversify their portfolios, early investors who got nervous about the defense sector, employees who needed cash for their kids' college tuition. I never pressured anyone, never played hardball, just made fair offers when people were ready to sell. Thomas Walsh had been one of those early investors. Came in during our Series A funding round in 2012 with $2.8 million when we needed capital to expand. His 12% stake had grown nicely over the years. The company was worth about $85 million now, which made his shares worth roughly $10.2 million. Not bad for a $2.8 million investment. But here's what Thomas Walsh didn't know, and what his son Brandon definitely didn't know. By the time Brandon walked into my office this morning, I owned 87% of Apex Industrial Security. 87%. Not 80, not 85. 87. I stared at the number on my laptop screen. In the venture capital world, anything over 51% gives you control. Anything over 67% gives you supermajority powers. 87%? That's nuclear level control. That's the ability to change the corporate charter, remove board members, sell the company, or do pretty much anything else you want without asking anyone's permission. I closed the laptop and started the engine. My phone rang before I even backed out of the parking space. Patricia Coleman, my attorney since day one. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. I just saw the email. What happened? Brandon Walsh fired me this morning. No board vote, no documentation. Just walked in and said I was done. That's bold and stupid, very. You want me to draft a response? Not yet. Let them sweat. I'll handle the board meeting tomorrow. She paused. I could hear her tapping a pen against her desk, the way she did when she was thinking through the legal angles. Patricia had been practicing corporate law for 25 years, most of it representing small business owners who got pushed around by bigger companies or crooked partners. She understood the game. Daniel, 87% is nuclear-level ownership. You know that, right? I do. You could dissolve the entire board tomorrow if you wanted. Replace every single member. Hell, you could change the company's articles of incorporation without asking anyone. I know. Are you going to? I pulled into traffic, squinting against the late afternoon sun reflecting off the office windows downtown. Columbus was growing fast these days, lots of tech companies moving in, but the manufacturing base was still strong. Steel mills, auto parts, plants, chemical facilities, all of them potential clients, all of them vulnerable to cyber attacks. I'm going to do what needs to be done, I said. That's what I figured. Call me if you need anything. And Daniel? Yeah? Don't let them. See you coming. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly. I didn't go home. Instead, I drove to a coffee shop on the east side of town, the kind of place where they play music just loud enough to drown out conversations, and nobody bothers you if you sit in the corner with a laptop for 3 hours. I ordered a black coffee and found a table near the back. Pulled up every document I'd need for tomorrow's board meeting. The charter, equity reports, emails between Gary and me when we restructured ownership after his retirement, board meeting minutes from the last 18 months. Everything that proved Brandon Walsh had overstepped his authority and violated corporate governance. I organized it all into one folder and uploaded it to our secure server. Then I printed 3 hard copies at the coffee shop's business center. Old school maybe, but paper doesn't crash when you need it most, and there's something satisfying about slapping documents down on a conference table when people think they've outsmarted you. Around 4:30, my phone buzzed with a text from Brandon. Just to confirm, we'll have your final paycheck processed by end of week. Please return all company property by Friday. I stared at the message for a long moment. Kid really thought it was over. Really thought he'd won. Probably already planning his first all-hands meeting as the new CEO, talking about modernization and efficiency, and all the other buzzwords they teach in business school. I didn't reply. Let him think what he wanted to think. He'd find out the truth tomorrow morning. Another text came through around 5 p.m. This one from Harold Stevens, the old-timer on our board. Former Marine like me, spent 30 years managing steel production lines in Cleveland before retiring. Harold understood what real work looked like. He also understood what happened when factories went dark because some punk with a laptop decided to mess with the power grid. Daniel, just saw your email. We need to talk. Call me. I called him immediately. He picked up on the first ring, and I could hear the sound of welding in the background. Harold never could stay completely retired. He was probably in his garage working on one of those vintage motorcycles he collected. What the hell is going on over there? Brandon fired me this morning. No vote, no notice, no documentation. Just walked in and told me I was done. Son of a bitch. I heard the welding torch shut off. He can't do that. Board Governance 101. I know. Question is, does he know? Kid's been asking questions for weeks about operational control, executive powers, that kind of stuff. I thought Thomas was just trying to educate him about how boards work. Now I'm thinking they were planning this. That made sense. Thomas Walsh was smart money, the kind of investor who did his homework and played the long game. Problem was, he'd apparently forgotten to do his homework on one crucial detail: exactly how much of the company I owned. Harold, did you know about the security breach at Riverside Manufacturing last month? The one where their whole assembly line went down for 3 days? Yeah, I heard. Cost them about $2.8 million in lost production. Brandon wanted to bid on their recovery contract. Wanted to subcontract the actual security work to some outfit in Singapore. Save money, he said. Be more competitive. Harold was quiet for a moment. Then, Jesus. You can't outsource cybersecurity for American manufacturing. Half these plants work defense contracts. There are federal regulations. That's what I told him. Kid looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. You know what this is really about, don't you? Harold's voice had that edge to it, the one he probably used when some young engineer tried to cut corners on safety protocols. Thomas sees dollar signs, thinks he can streamline operations, cut costs, maybe flip the company to one of those big consulting firms in a couple years. I hadn't thought about it that way, but it made perfect sense. Rip out the expensive American labor, outsource the technical work, turn Apex into a middleman operation that looked good on paper but couldn't actually protect anything that mattered. What do you need from me tomorrow? Harold asked. Just show up. 9 a.m. Conference Room A. I'll handle the rest. You're not going to burn the place down, are you? I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. Only if I have to. After I hung up with Harold, I sat in the coffee shop for another hour, thinking through the board dynamics. 7 members total. Harold was solid. We'd served together briefly in the early 90s, and he understood what the company meant to American manufacturing security. Jennifer Ross was the wild card. Former CFO of an automotive parts supplier, sharp as a tack, but focused on numbers above everything else. If I could show her that Brandon's plan would kill profitability, she'd flip. Timothy Beck was newer to the board, brought in 6 months ago when we expanded, retired FBI cybercrimes unit, understood the threat landscape. He wouldn't support outsourcing security work to foreign contractors, not when it involved protecting American infrastructure. The problem was Dr. Angela Foster and Maxwell Brooks. Both had come in with Thomas Walsh, part of his investor group. Foster ran some kind of management consulting firm. Brooks had made his money in tech before moving into investing. Both of them talked a good game about efficiency and modernization, but neither had ever worked in manufacturing. They didn't understand that when a steel mill's control systems get compromised, people can die. That left Sarah Williams, our employee representative. She'd been with us for 8 years, started as a junior analyst, worked her way up to senior project manager. Sarah knew exactly what Brandon's outsourcing plan would mean for the 180 people whose livelihoods depended on Apex staying American-owned and American-operated. By the time I left the coffee shop, it was getting dark. I drove home slowly, taking the long way through downtown Columbus. The city had changed a lot since I moved here in 2009. More tech companies, more startups, more young professionals walking around in expensive suits, talking on phones. But the bones of the place were still industrial, still blue-collar, still the kind of place where people understood that making things mattered. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat there for a moment looking at the house. It wasn't much to look at from the outside. Standard 1980s construction, 3 bedrooms, 2-car garage. But it was paid off, and it was mine. Just like the company was mine, even if Brandon Walsh and his father didn't know it yet. I went inside, and heated up leftover Chinese takeout from the weekend. While I was eating, my phone rang. Jake, calling from Ohio State. Dad, I heard something happened at work today. You okay? Word travels fast in the cybersecurity world, especially when it involves a company founder getting fired by a board member's kid. Someone on our engineering team probably had a friend who had a friend who went to school with Jake. I'm fine, son. How'd you hear about it? Tommy Rodriguez's older brother works at Midwest Manufacturing. Said there was some drama at Apex, something about Brandon Walsh taking over. I should have figured. Midwest Manufacturing was one of our biggest clients, an automotive parts plant that employed about 600 people in the suburbs. We'd been protecting their systems for 5 years, ever since they got hit by a ransomware attack that could have shut them down permanently. It's complicated, Jake. I'll explain everything when I see you this weekend. Dad, he paused, and I could hear the concern in his voice. You built that company, you and Mr. Holmes. Brandon can't just take it away from you. No, I said, looking out the kitchen window at the backyard where I'd taught Jake to throw a curveball 10 years ago. He can't. Need me to come home? I can drive down tonight, stay in school. Stay. Focus on your engineering finals. This'll all be sorted out by tomorrow. After I hung up with Jake, I poured myself a beer and sat on the back deck. The night was cool, and I could smell wood smoke from someone's fireplace down the street. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle echoed across the city. I didn't think about tomorrow, didn't rehearse what I'd say, or plan out my strategy. I already knew what I was going to do. Instead, I just sat there in the quiet, letting the weight of 14 years settle on my shoulders. I woke up at 5:30 the next morning. No alarm needed. My body just knew. Made coffee, scrambled eggs, toast with butter, sat at the kitchen table reading the news on my tablet while I ate. Nothing about cybersecurity threats or manufacturing security. Just politics and sports and celebrity gossip. The world had no idea that in 3 hours, the future of American industrial cybersecurity might change forever. By 7:30, I was showered, dressed in my best Navy suit, and driving toward downtown Columbus. Traffic was light. I pulled into the parking garage at 8:45, parked in my old spot. The nameplate was still there. D. Murphy, CEO. I grabbed my briefcase and headed up. The elevator ride felt different this time. Not like yesterday's descent into uncertainty, more like climbing toward something that had been inevitable from the moment Brandon Walsh walked into my office and thought he could erase 14 years of work with a single conversation. Conference room A was already occupied when I arrived at 8:58. Brandon sat at the head of the table like he owned it, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most of our engineers made in a week. Thomas Walsh sat to his right, stone-faced and formal. The rest of the board was scattered around. Harold near the windows, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Jennifer Ross with her tablet and legal pad, taking notes on everything. Timothy Beck studying some documents. Dr. Foster and Maxwell Brooks sitting together. Clearly Team Walsh. Sarah Williams in the corner, nervous energy radiating off her like heat. I walked in at exactly 9 a.m. Didn't knock. Didn't ask permission, just pushed the door open and strode to the opposite end of the table. Set down my briefcase with enough force that everyone looked up. "Good morning," I said. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice." Brandon leaned back in his chair, trying to project confidence. "Daniel, I appreciate you wanting to discuss the transition, but as I mentioned yesterday, the decision has been made." "Has it?" I opened my briefcase and pulled out the folders. "Because according to our corporate charter, Section 6, subsection C, No founding officer may be removed without a 2-3 majority board vote, documented in writing, with 30 days advance notice. I slid copies of the charter across the table. You gave me none of those things, Brandon, which means yesterday's termination was not only inappropriate, it was illegal under Ohio corporate law. Thomas Walsh finally spoke, his voice calm and measured. Daniel, we understand you're upset, but Brandon has full authority as acting CEO to make personnel decisions. Acting CEO appointed by whom? I looked around the table. Show me the board resolution. Show me the documented vote that gave him that authority. Silence. Dr. Foster shifted in her seat. Maxwell Brooks was suddenly very interested in his coffee cup. Harold cleared his throat. Thomas, did the board actually vote on Brandon's appointment? Because I don't remember that meeting. It was understood, Thomas said, given our strategic direction discussions. Understood by whom? Timothy Beck leaned forward. Because corporate governance doesn't work on understandings. It works on documented decisions. I could see the momentum shifting. Time to play my ace card. There's something else you should all know, I said. I opened the second folder and pulled out the equity distribution report. Before we discuss Brandon's authority, or lack thereof, let's talk about company ownership. I placed the document in the center of the table. As of yesterday morning, I own 87% of Apex Industrial Security. The room went dead quiet. Jennifer Ross picked up the paper, scanned it, and her eyes went wide. She passed it to Harold, who looked at it and whistled low under his breath. 87%, I repeated. Acquired legally over the past 6 years through fair market transactions with willing sellers, every purchase properly documented and filed with the state. Brandon's face had gone pale. That's impossible. Is it? When's the last time you actually looked at the equity reports, Brandon? When's the last time your father looked? Thomas Walsh snatched the document from Harold's hands, studied it for a long moment, then slowly set it down. His expression had shifted from confident to something that looked a lot like panic. This changes nothing, Dr. Foster said, but her voice lacked conviction. The board still has oversight, responsibility. The board serves at the pleasure of the shareholders, I said, and the primary shareholder is sitting right here. Sarah Williams spoke up for the first time. What does this mean for the employees? I turned to her. It means no outsourcing to Singapore, no layoffs to cut costs, no compromising American manufacturing security for short-term profits. Harold stood up. All right, let's make this official. I move to reverse Daniel Murphy's termination and restore his position as CEO of Apex Industrial Security. Seconded, Timothy Beck said immediately. All in favor? Harold called. Hands went up around the table. Harold, Timothy, Jennifer, Sarah. 4 out of 7. I looked at the others. Dr. Foster, Maxwell, you're both smart business people. You understand what 87% ownership means. Dr. Foster raised her hand reluctantly. Then Maxwell Brooks. 6 votes. Brandon slammed his palm on the table. This is ridiculous. You can't just— Motion carries, Harold interrupted. Daniel, you're officially reinstated as CEO. Brandon looked at his father, waiting for support that never came. Thomas Walsh was staring at the equity report like it might change if he looked at it long enough. Fine, Brandon said, standing up so fast his chair rolled backward. You can have your little company. But you're making a mistake. American manufacturing is dying. Outsourcing is the future. Maybe, I said, but not on my watch. He stormed out, leaving the door open behind him. Thomas Walsh followed a moment later, pausing only to look back at me with something that might have been respect. After they left, the remaining board members sat in silence for a moment. Then Jennifer Ross started laughing. Quiet at first, then louder. 87%, she said, shaking her head. You've been playing chess while they were playing checkers. I just protected what we built, I said. 2 weeks later, I was in my office when Patricia Coleman called. Thomas Walsh wants to sell his shares, she said, all day 12%. His lawyer called it this morning. What's he asking? $8.5 million. Fair market value. I leaned back in my chair. If I bought those shares, I'd own 94% of the company. 94%. Make the offer, I said. A month after that, Jake called from Ohio State. Dad, I've been thinking about that internship next summer. Is the offer still open? I looked out the window of my office. Down on the street, I could see workers heading into the manufacturing district, people who depended on companies like ours to keep their factories running, their jobs secure, their communities alive. The offer's open, I said. But you should know, we're not just building a business anymore. We're building a legacy. I know, Dad. That's why I want to be part of it. That's when I knew we'd won. Not just the battle with Brandon Walsh, but something bigger. Something that would last long after I was gone. Sometimes the best revenge is just refusing to lose. I learned something that day, that every man past 50 knows but rarely says out loud, real power isn't about the title on your door or the size of your office. It's about understanding the game well enough to change the rules when someone tries to cheat you out of what you've earned.